morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Daniel Ayala. It's a pleasure to have you all here today. I am the co-founder of Conex Americas, and we thank you for attending today's webinar. We have Patrice Perret speaking today on behalf of Conex Americas. He's one of our board members. He will be introduced shortly. But before we start, would like to share with you a little bit of background on who we are and some of the key members that we have in our team. So as I mentioned, I'm co-founder along with Daniel Chatelain. I think you may have met Daniel if you attended prior meetings. He's really well known in the Bay Area for prior activities with Bay Pay and Pay Academy. He's out of Palo Alto. We have Gerardo Bonilla, who works at DOC and is a Chief Revenue Officer yet. Carol Grunberg, Chief Business Officer at Uno, a really well-known global payments platform. Patrice, who will be our guest speaker today. Victor Unda, CEO of OKY, which is a Latin America-focused value and goods service provider. And then Rafael de la Vega, co-founder of Mindwell in San Francisco. Those are our board members. We're always recruiting board members, so if you're interested, please don't hesitate to contact either Daniel or myself. We're always happy to entertain conversations. We're going to go slowly as we let people roll into the calls. I think we have a number of people registering. This meeting is being broadcast in English, but it's being translated real time into Spanish. So if you turn on your closed captioning, you can actually see the real-time translation into Spanish if you want to review the Spanish section because of language it needs. And I'll say that in Spanish in a minute. I think you already know what our key objectives are and what we're aiming to do eventually, which is we look to provide expert insights into the ecosystem between Latin America and Silicon Valley, primarily with a focus of bringing venture capital, know-how, and technology to the Americas and helping companies in the Americas bridge the geographical gaps and become more regional or global players. We aim to provide the Silicon Valley investors and technology companies access and know-how into the Americas by engaging in these efforts. There's a lot of interesting data on the region in terms of companies that are being funded, so we aim to provide that as well. And then ultimately, we're looking to create an ecosystem for networking and collaboration where people can have a meeting point. All of our meetings to date have been virtual, but we aim to have an in-person gathering at some point in time, hopefully by the end of this year. We are looking to invite venture capital firms as well as investors to participate in our events and get to know the community that we are in the process of forming. We are a very young organization. We just started working on this in the fourth quarter of last year. So we are in the early stage, growth stage of what we're trying to do. Ultimately, we want to become coaches and advisory support mechanisms for Latin American entities as well as Silicon Valley entities. We will start momentarily, just giving it maybe one more minute for people to come in. We're 6 minutes into the session. I'm going to switch to Spanish for those of you that are Spanish speaking or bilingual and your Spanish is better than your English. I'll do that for just a couple of sentences and I'll switch right back to English. Para los que están en esta reunión donde el español es su lenguaje principal, este evento está siendo traducido en tiempo real al lenguaje español. Si encienden el closed captioning o las siglas en lenguaje y escogen el lenguaje en el que estamos trabajando, que es en español, fácilmente pueden ver la traducción en tiempo real de inglés a español. Solamente tienen que encender closed captioning en los settings de Zoom, ¿ok? Espero que esta funcionalidad les ayude a tener una mejor experiencia escuchando a nuestros oradores. Y una vez más, gracias por participar en este evento, es un verdadero placer. En el futuro vamos a estar haciendo eventos en español y estaremos haciendo closed captioning de español a inglés para los americanos. Entonces, Yo creo que el siguiente evento va a ser en español 100%. Tenemos un par de anuncios prontos a hacer con colaboración con otras entidades en Latinoamérica que va a ser muy interesante. Voy a regresar a inglés ahora. Muchas gracias de nuevo. Okay, so I think we're all set to get started. I'm going to hand it over to Daniel Chatelain. Before I hand it over to him, let me just introduce him real briefly. Daniel is co-founder of Conex Americas. He's also a payment and industry executive focused on innovation, sits on our board of directors, and he started a company, a group called the Bay Pay Forum to help foster payments and commerce in the Bay Area and throughout the United States. He was doing this before the word fintech even existed. He's currently the CEO of Pay Academy, a technology firm that provides information and learning tools for people who are entering the fintech ecosystem and want to understand everything about payments and banking technology. It's a great resource to learn about payments, a lot about banking, and it's a subscription-based service and also a single purchase service option. It's a member-based organization. Over 17,000 executives are members of Bay Pay Forum. Prior to that, Daniel was CEO and president of various companies. He worked within the Lagarde and the EADS group, which included Airbus, Ariane, and Aerocopter. In this meeting today, we're surrounded by two French men, so it's really a pleasure to be in the company of both Daniel Chatelain and Patrice Perret. I will hand it over to Daniel at the stage to continue the introduction, and we'll hand it off to Patrice in just a few minutes.
Thank you very much, Danny, for the introduction. I would like to thank Patrice for taking the time to explain a little bit how to create a successful deck to investors. Briefly, Patrice is a repeat entrepreneur in the field of mass distributed products and technologies. He currently advises fintechs with the mission of increasing the availability of good and fair financial services to everyone by helping with compliance, security, and project management. Patrice was also the CEO and co-founder of Banking Up, formerly Plastic, one of the first fintechs deploying mobile banking services to the underserved. He was CEO of MobileWay, acquired by SAP, a mobile messaging company, which was routing billions of SMS messages around the world for large businesses and media. He was also, before that, the director in charge of Java for cell phones and smart cards at Sun Microsystems, after Sun acquired Patrice's first startup company, Integrated Arts, and at the time when Sun Microsystems was the .com, if you remember that. Prior to his startup roles, Patrice worked with large multinational companies, Gemalto, the world's largest manufacturer of bank cards and SIM cards, now owned by Thales, consumer electronics manufacturer Thomson RCA, and geological research firm Schlumberger. He is a graduate from École Centrale de Lyon in France and has raised over $125 million for his companies and companies he's advising, and has returned over $450 million to these investors. For information, a copy of the slides will be provided after the workshop if you are interested. And as Danny said, if you don't speak English, or if you don't understand my English, we have a real-time translation of the presentation available. You just have to click on caption and select the language you want it translated to. And now I'm going to leave the mic to Patrice, who's going to present his workshop on fundraising.
Hey, thank you, Danny and Daniel, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to just, jump right in, and you have to be patient with my French accent as well. And I'm going to go through a set of slides which you will be given a copy at the end, which is intended to explain how best to create a presentation for investors so that you can raise money. So ideally, you could start a company with your own money or with your family's money, not pay yourself, and you get to a certain level. But that's not going to scale. So the bad news is that you are likely to need to raise money from other people. The good news is that you probably have to raise a lot less money today for whatever you're doing than you would have to raise 15 years ago, because you can benefit from cloud computing. You don't necessarily have to have a big office because people are used to working from home, but you still have to raise money. And so that's the reality. And one of the tools to raise money is an investor's presentation. It is not the only tool, but it's the best one to start with. So here are four formats for how you can explain your company to people with the goal of obtaining money from them. All of these documents are living documents. They are unlikely to stay the same in the course of your company. And even if you never present a particular format to anybody, it is useful to prepare these documents because it will help you think about your own company and remind yourself of your mission, of your goals, and make sure that you are not forgetting anything. The reason why an investor's deck is the good starting point is because it's neither a very complicated long document like a full business plan, and it is not an executive summary or what we call an elevator pitch, something that you can say in just a minute, because it's more difficult to do very short or very long. An investor's deck have the nice property of being somewhere in between. So before we start explaining how best to create a deck, you need to remember that people are going to give you money not because you need it, but because they want to make money out of it. So you need to put yourself in the shoes of the investor and explain to them how great an investment it is going to be. You're not explaining how great a product because you're trying to sell them the product. An investor is not a buyer of your product. They're not your client. And if they invest in you, you don't become their client. So keep that in mind. You are trying to convince them that you can be a good investment with a high return on investment, but you're not their client and they're not your client. And don't be intimidated because they know a lot less about your industry and your market than you do. And I like to always say, remember that the investors are people who have more money than brains, and you are the ones who have more brains than money. So you shouldn't be shy. They can be fairly intimidating because a lot of these people are very rich and arrogant, but they will be interested in you if you have a good story. So how to present to them with that investor's slide deck in mind? Most investors will not give you more than 30 minutes, maybe, and plus maybe additional 10 minutes for questions. So you need to keep this relatively short because you don't want to be caught in a situation where you went only through half of your presentation and then they cut you short and say, hey, we don't have time for the rest. So my recommendation is keep the presentation to no more than about 15 slides. With about 2 minutes per slide, you are going to get to about 30 minutes in total, and then you have still room for questions. If you can do less than 15 slides, it's even better. And I would also not recommend that you send a copy in advance because you don't want people to have seen your presentation before because they're going to be distracted and they're not going to listen to you as carefully as if it was the first time they see the presentation. I'm going to use a format which has been published by Sequoia Capital, and I will show you a link to that so you can download it for yourself. that format from a very well-known venture capital firm here in Silicon Valley has all of the important topics that you need to cover. And there's 10 of them: company purpose, problem, solution, why now. I'm not going to read all of them. It doesn't mean that you need to address every single one of them and that every single one is one slide. You can change the order a little bit. Some of the topics may deserve multiple slides. In some cases, you may skip some particular topics, and I will explain that in a minute. You should also be careful as you are going to present your product as part of the presentation. I would advise not to embed a video. It's tempting to prepare a video and then show it to your investors in the middle of the presentation, but this will damage the rhythm of the presentation. If you have more things to say than would fit inside 50 slides, you can create backup slides. So slides that you put at the very end, screenshots of your product, or if you know that people are going to ask certain questions, you prepare an answer to that question and you put it in the backup slide, but you don't put it in the flow of the presentation itself. So I'm going to start with all of these topics one by one. The first one, company purpose or mission. This is not easy because you want to keep it short and you want to keep it memorable. My company does this, or the mission is that. The good news is that probably you've already thought about this and your company purpose or mission statement is already on your website. So you just use what you have already defined for yourself. Typically, I would recommend that even if you're very ambitious and you want to be the Stripe or the Facebook of something, if you say so, you are going to sound very naive. And so I would be very careful not to compare yourself to a well-established company, even if it's your ambition. You need to define your company as your own. And be careful not to define your company as just your first product. Maybe you only have one product when you start, but obviously investors are interested in a series of products, and they don't want you to be a single product company. They want you to have a mission that goes beyond a single product. The next topic is the problem. What problem are you solving for your customers? That's usually easy to describe. You need to explain exactly what pain customers have in whatever they're doing, how they address the pain if they're trying to alleviate it. Make sure that you don't overstate the problem, don't exaggerate it, because you don't want to get into a discussion with your investors where your investors are going to disagree that this is a big problem. So keep it plausible. And try to possibly not describe yet there how other people are solving that particular problem. Keep that for one of the future slides, which will be the competition. Once you have defined the problem, then you need to define your solution. How are you solving the problem that you've identified for your customers? Describe your product, and how it will be used for solving the problem. Provide some examples if you have already got some customers, and provide some examples of how you solve the problem for them. And one thing to really keep in mind that's very important is what I call the difference between a vitamin and a painkiller. A lot of products are just vitamins. They just improve one dimension of something. It's the same product as someone else, but it's 20% faster or 10% cheaper. And that doesn't really attract investors. What investors want to see is a painkiller. Since you've described the pain that your customers have, you need to present your solution as a painkiller. And I'm going to give you an example of, from one of my own companies. So the very first company that I created a long time ago was solving a problem that the smart card industry, right, the plastic cards that we all have now in our pockets that have a chip on them, or the SIM cards that we have in our cell phones, these little chips have software in them. And it is secure software because it contains security keys, etc., can run algorithms. And because these chips have no keyboard and no connected screen, it is very difficult to develop and debug the software in those chips. And the only way that existed at the time was that you had to write the code for those chips in assembly language, the lowest level language possible. And you had to literally use an oscilloscope to verify what the chip was doing when it was running your software. It was very painful. My company had an idea of starting from a high level language. And we started with the Java language that had just come out from Sun Microsystems. And we adapted it to run on these small chips. And because Java is, I don't want to get into technical details, but it's a virtual machine language. It has a notion of sandbox, and so it is inherently secure because if the software crashes, it doesn't do anything wrong outside of where it's supposed to run. So our solution was to say, hey, we are going to give you the security you want, but you no longer need the oscilloscope. You can write in a high-level language that all of the students know. And this is how I raised my first money for my first company. I got lots of people interested in this because I was resolving a particular painful problem for a fairly large industry. The next topic in that Sequoia Capital flow is probably optional. It's the why now. You need to think about it. Are you too early or are you too late in introducing your company? And you have to ask yourself that question because very often you don't want to be too early or too late, and you have to figure out why is it a good time. It does not necessarily apply always because you may introduce an innovation in a field that is relatively new, let's say artificial intelligence, right? No question that, now is the right time to create new things in artificial intelligence. 10 years ago was too late. Probably 5 years from now, was too early. 5 years from now, it's going to be too late. So you don't need to say that, it is obvious. But in some other industries, it's usually good to have a timeline where you explain to people why you are in the right spot. The market size. So you've explained that you have a solution to a pain that your customers have, but investors are interested in earning a return on your money, and the return will be proportional to your sales and to how big your company becomes. And so you'd better have a very sizable market because investors are interested in something that can go very big. You should be very careful not to have a blanket statement that says, hey, my market is $500 billion, and all I have to do is capture 1% of it, and we will be fine. Most investors hate that sort of presentation because where did you get the 1% from? Why is it not 0.5? Why is it not 5%? It's completely meaningless. You need to be more accurate, and you need to define what is your total addressable market, what is the entire universe of the market you're addressing, what is the serviceable addressable market, what is the subset of that market that is really a target for you, and what is the serviceable obtainable market, which is the one that you are likely to be able to capture given where you are in the cycle. And I'm going to give you another example here. It's a company that I'm on the board of, which is called Smart Property. You can visit them at smartproperty.com. They create software for homeowner associations. In the US, we have a lot of housing that is managed by associations. There's 370,000 associations managing properties in the US. And the total amount of the property value that they manage is $11 trillion. It's a huge number. So that's the assets that they're managing. And this is the goal of this company is to maintain these assets and make sure they are properly repaired, expanded, etc., as the property is aged. But the addressable market, the service addressable market, the SAM, is only for those associations that have figured out a budget that needs to be managed for the maintenance of these properties. And in total in the US, that budget is about $100 billion. So $100 billion being used annually to maintain a total set of assets of $11 trillion. And not all of the budget that is available for managing those properties needs any help. Some HOAs are very good at managing this, and they will never buy the software of that company smart property because they don't need to. But in this particular case, a very high percentage, 91% of the associations have unexpected, unplanned, and unfunded projects that they have to take care of. So you can see here how we go from 11 trillion to 100 billion to about $90 billion as the market for that particular company. And as you create those numbers, make sure that you mention your sources so that these numbers can be verified by investors after they've seen their presentation. Competition. So that's a very important one, because you cannot possibly say, hey, I have no competition. Because if you have no competition, then you have probably no market. And you cannot either show a myriad of competitors, because then investors will be worried that you're going to have a hard time differentiate. So you need to find the right balance between not too few and not too many. But also that slide is important to show how you are different from the competition. And I'm going to give you a historical example from a long time ago, but you probably have all heard about this company called ARM, which is currently the chip in your cell phone and the chip in your MacBook. When they started in '85, their competition was Intel and AMD, and they had Intel and AMD 99% of the market for processors for computers. The distinction that ARM had was one particular angle, which was they were capable of producing a lot of processing power, what we call MIPS, millions of instructions per second, for very little power consumption, very little watts. And they had this slide that I'm showing on the left, where they was just showing one dimension, how many MIPS per watt could they do compared to the competition. And so they had this bold statement saying, we have these very two powerful companies as competitors, and we're going to beat the crap out of them because we are doing something that's 10 times better than they are. And the reality is that they started from 0% market share in '85, and now they have a 99% market share in processors, and they are in all laptops from Apple since 2022. So that's a good example that I wanted to give, but also point out that one best way of differentiating your company is to have something where two things that used to seem incompatible, you could not get a lot of MIPS without a lot of watt. Things that seem incompatible have become now compatible. In a sense, what I was showing earlier about my own company doing the software tools for the smart cards was also the same, where we could use high-level language, but be secure. And these were things that were compatible. So think about this. If you can do things that seem to be contradictory and nobody has figured out how to do that, then you have a strong differentiation. For the product part, I have no particular advice to give you because obviously it depends on what your product is. And this is a good place where you may have multiple slides to explain your product. You should be careful not to get into too much details. Don't do a video. Do only a demonstration if it's very short. Don't use technical jargon. Again, remember that the investors that you're talking to are not your customer. They just want to make sure that you know that you have a well-packaged product, that it is understandable. But don't spend too much time on this. And it's a mistake that a lot of innovators do, because obviously, as the inventor of this, you are in love with your own product. So it's very tempting to spend too much time on it. Instead, you should devote more of the presentation to the business model slide, which is you explain to investors how you're going to make money. What is the unit model for one instance of your product, be it a physical product or a service? What does it cost you to produce? For how much money can you sell it? How long it takes to convince people to buy your product, so the sales cycle? how are how are you going to distribute it? And do you already have a customer pipeline? This will be, again, very dependent on your market, but having these key indicators are going to give the investors a good idea of whether you are realistic in what you think the company can make. I would advise not to start with a free to start model. I mean, there's a lot of startup companies that got off the ground by just giving away their product. It is very difficult to recover from something that you give away and then ask people to pay you afterwards. So if you can avoid, you know, a freemium model, a free to start model, that's the best way. The team. And by the way, the team could be presented earlier in the flow. You need to present the founders and your board and board advisors. The one thing that's important about the team is that investors invest in people. They will invest in you. And if something is wrong with your product, that product can probably be adjusted and repaired. If you haven't identified the right market, they can probably help you with readjusting your targets. But if your team is dysfunctional and people don't work together well, this is very difficult to repair. And a lot of smart startups fail because the team initially is not able to work together. So the most important thing to show on that slide is how long are the people on the slide have been working together. Because that will reassure investors. If you're not a first-time entrepreneur and you've already been successful with raising money and returning money to investors, it's a good place to say so. Saying, hey, you know, I raised so many million for the previous company and I returned so much to my investors. Financials, which is almost the end of the flow, is where you demonstrate how you think you're going to do in the marketplace, how much money are you going to make, and the two essential things that you need to show here are not only the profit and loss statement of what quantity of dollars and products you are going to sell over the next 3 years. By the way, I would never go beyond 3 years because, you know, if you show 5 or 7 years, you know, you're just shooting in the dark. You don't know. And the other thing that you need to show on the financial slide is, well, how much money do you need and for what, right? So the profit and loss statement and the deal that you're seeking, you know, I'm raising 5 million, I'm raising 3, I need 10. And you explain why you need that money and what it's going to take you to. Some investors will require balance sheets, cash flow, cap table. The recommendation here is not to show this in the first presentation. Just wait until they confirm they have an interest. In terms of format, try to stick to established formats for how you present in an accounting manner a profit and loss statement, and round down all your numbers because, you know, you are going to be wrong in your projections. So it's better to be conservative and to round down all the numbers. And I wanted to finish with giving you these links that I had promised. So that Sequoia Capital template that I used is available at the first link here. There's another link coming from Harvard Business School for an even more aggressive type of presentation deck, which is only for 10 minutes. It's tricky to do that one, so I'm not necessarily recommending it. And then the last link here is a set of free templates that will help you, nothing to do with the investor's presentation, but some of the docs that they have will be useful for contracts and cap table and investment docs. And this is the US company Cooley, which has put together a website called CooleyGo, where for free, you can download all these templates and save yourselves a lot of money because you don't have to pay expensive lawyers to do so. So that's my presentation. A copy of it will be available to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrice. So now we're going to go to the questions sections. So if you have any question, you can put it in the chat and I'll tell Patrice. Okay, so there is one here. So, you know, sometimes you present to different investors, different types of investors, angels or VCs, or even sometimes maybe corporate ventures. So should you have several presentations based on the type of investor you are meeting?
Yes, the answer is you should have probably you will end up with multiple versions of the presentation because you need to adjust it to what you think these investors are looking for. It's not dishonest, you're not telling different stories to different people, but you may have to adjust things a little bit depending on whether or not, for example, these investors that you're talking to have already invested in your space, or maybe you've detected that they've invested in one of your competitors. And so you need to be careful because, or you need to show them that you know that they have invested in your competitor, and you would show that on the competition slide. So there's good reasons for adjusting. The main reason for having multiple versions, of course, is that you are going to evolve, your product is going to evolve, your projections are going to evolve. So you need to maintain that presentation fresh and make sure that if we're in April 2025, you don't show up with a slide deck that says, copyright my company, November 2024. You don't want to show something that sounds obsolete.
Okay. And Danny, we have a question in the Q&A in Spanish. So do you want to take, do you want to translate it for Patrice?
Yeah, I'm not, okay, hold on. Yep.
You're on mute.
Yep. Can you hear me? Yes, okay, good. They're asking if it would be possible to share the presentation after the by email. The answer is yes. We can share that by email. In fact, let me share my screen because we do have that available. Just email either myself or Daniel, and we'll be happy to share with you. You can email me at my email address or Daniel, and we'll be glad to share it with you. Also, we have a YouTube channel where we will be in a couple of days. It takes about 3 to 4 days. We'll be uploading the presentation of today, the recorded presentation, and we'll make it available for you to review with the translation available on it. So we're happy to make that option available. And one other plug I'll make before we move on to the next question is, please on LinkedIn, follow our group and follow our page. It helps us to create more visibility. I think a lot of people benefit from the information we share with everyone, and the more people we can have access to this information, the better off we are. So please join our page on LinkedIn as a follower, and also our group. And if you want to refer to the presentation live, you can look at the YouTube channel as noted. And we will email the presentation if you want to. It was an anonymous request, so just send us an email and we'll be happily send it to you. Okay.
Thank you, Danny. So
Yep.
I have another question. Yeah, so which is about NDAs. When you do your presentation, you have a lot of IP that you are providing and disclosing, and when you talk to people, you don't want to have this information floating around to anybody or to most of the rest of the world. So is there a way to ask for an NDA when meeting with a VC or angel investors?
Yes. First of all, most professional VCs, at least in the US, will be offended if you ask for an NDA, and they will not give you one, because their argument is going to be, if I, as a VC, am leaking your information to your competition, that's the end of me. I will not be trusted by the industry. So I am going to keep your presentation confidential, but don't ask me to sign an NDA. For less professional investors, business angels, groups of business angels, you probably are better off with an NDA in place, and because they're not professional, and you never know if they're fishing for information for one of their friends. I realized that I failed to say in the format that it's probably a good idea to have in the footer something that says copyright my company, confidential information, 2025, do not redistribute. Also, you will realize that your presentation can be useful for non-investors, potential partners, and all you have to do this is you remove the business model slide, you remove the financial slide, and then you have a presentation that shows how great your company is, how great it is at solving a particular problem, but you don't disclose any particular financial information.
Okay, that's good to know. Anything else? Yeah, you talked about demonstration. So should you be ready to have a demonstration? You said you shouldn't spend too much time, but sometimes, you know, it's all about the product, and some investors may want to have, you know, more details, and the look and feel may be important and so on. So should you be ready to do a full-blown demonstration of your product?
Yes, I think it's a good idea to be ready for one. Don't necessarily force one on your investors listening to you if they don't ask for one, but being able to switch away from your slide deck and say, let me show you the product on my screen, because I'm assuming that a lot of products are demonstrable either on a cell phone or on a PC. You should do that. It will be appreciated. Again, investors will want to make sure that it is properly presented, that it looks professional, that people will want to buy it. Not them, but your customers will want to buy it. So having a demonstration ready is a good idea. Sometimes what I've seen is in the middle of the deck, there is a special slide that is called intermission demonstration, right? And so if you think that in most cases you will need that, you can introduce the demonstration this way by having a slide that says intermission. You signal that it is outside of the flow of your presentation, and you just need to keep that as short as possible so that at the end of the demonstration, investors don't say to you, oh, by the way, oh, thank you for the demo, we no longer have any time for the rest of your slides, right? So again, yeah, it's a good idea to have this ready. You just need to be very well rehearsed and very well prepared and short.
So another question, you are advising companies in the US, but also in Latin America. So what do you think? Is it different to present a deck to investors in Latin America or in Silicon Valley?
It's not really fundamentally different. The amount of money may be slightly different, and the expectation could be different as well. What is going to be different in all cases is not necessarily the product itself, but it's going to be the market, because it's a different geography. It's multiple countries in Latin America as opposed to a single country, but it's also a bigger population, 670 million versus 330 million in the US. So you absolutely need to adjust to this when you present with the goal of deploying something in Latin America. And my own experience has been helping companies that were born in the US, which then have obtained customers in Peru, in Panama, in Mexico, in Brazil. I haven't had an experience yet So I would not be able to answer the question for somebody who is completely Latin America centric and started in Latin America. I would not know the answer to that question.
Okay, so another question is about we have a lot of people in Connect Americas coming from Latin America. And so what are their chances of raising money in Silicon Valley, for example? Pitching, using the slides you demonstrated, you explained, what are their chances of raising money here?
So it depends a lot on how they've structured the company. This is something that I did not address in the presentation because it's not part of the presentation material. But unfortunately, a lot of venture capitalists in the US are uncomfortable investing in companies that don't have a legal framework in the US. They don't understand the legal framework in other countries, so they insist that they would be happy to invest if you had a holding company in somewhere in the States, and then everything else was somewhere else. This has happened to me. I was the second company I ran, which I sold to SAP, to Sybase and to SAP, was French. And the first thing I had to do, and we only had customers outside of the US. The first thing I had to do in my presentation to VCs here in Silicon Valley is to promise that we would incorporate the company in Delaware, and we would make the French operations and the other divisions a subsidiary of the Delaware company, just for the legal framework, because the most likely way that the VC will give you money in the US is to put US dollars into a US corporation and let you distribute the money where you need it. So you need to be, unfortunately, prepared for that. You don't really have to have a slide for it, but you need to be able to speak to it. They could ask the question and you say, oh yes, of course. It doesn't cost much money to do this. It could be more difficult if they insist that you must have a large part of your executive team in the US. It's changing. 15 years ago, most VCs wanted to be within driving distance, or what I could within shouting distance of the management team, so that they could come and see you and shout at you if they weren't happy. Now, post-COVID, everybody's comfortable with doing things remotely. So this is less of an issue. But the legal framework and the vehicle for investment in the US is still, unfortunately, very US-centric, unless you know that the investment firm has a correspondent, office somewhere in Latin America.
So you mentioned a company being abroad and doing kind of a reverse merger. So I had the case in a past life of this, where the headquarters was in France and we had a subsidiary in the US, and we wanted to go IPO in the US. To do that, we had to do a reverse merger. The problem was we were owned by a large conglomerate, which was a public company as well. And so there was a huge tax implication on the French side that pretty much killed the deal. Compared to the US, it was very easy to do. So do you know if in Latin America you have the same constraints, or if it's like the US, it's easy to do reverse mergers?
Frankly, I don't know the answer to that question. Maybe Danny, but I don't.
The ecosystem in Latin America is constantly changing, and every country is really difficult to generalize throughout the whole region. So, countries like Brazil and Mexico is probably more likely that you could do that. Other countries maybe less likely. One comment I would make is going back to the original question you asked before about companies in Latin America getting funding from US entities. Absolutely, setting up the holding company in the US is the only way to do it for the most part. Most of them are not comfortable dispersing somewhere else. They also often want to see a principal based in the US, so that there's some accountability to US governance and laws. Not always, but typically. And they normally don't eliminate the Latin America entity. They actually keep the Latin America entity as a subsidiary for local funding, because there are entities in Latin America that are not interested for various reasons in having any jurisdiction exposure into the US soil. So they will invest into a company in Guatemala, for example, because they are very comfortable doing that within the region, while maybe a US-based investor would only invest in a holding company. So I'm actually a shareholder of a company and a former client that has both investment channels, and they even set up an entity in Panama to facilitate funding from other sources. So it's pretty common to see that structure. I think it gets more complex when some of these companies start to cut across 3, 4, 5 countries. Then it becomes more challenging in trying to address how you structure the company and whether you need to have a subsidiary in each country or how you're going to go about it. Because the cross-border implications in legal and compliance issues, completely vary from one country to the other, right? So that's something to keep in mind.
Okay. Yeah, so thank you for your insight, Danny. So I think we're gonna stop here. We a little bit over time, but thank you, Patrice, for all these great insights. As we said, we will share the presentation. You can send either to Daniel or myself an email, and we'll forward it to you. Feel free to connect on LinkedIn and also to follow the Connects Americas page. And also join the group. So like that, you can have some discussions with other members. So thank you again, Patrice, and thank you everybody for joining us today. And we're going to have other workshops. The next one will be on May 15. It's a Thursday at 1 p.m. Pacific time. And it will be about go-to-market strategies. So keep that in your calendar. We'll make some announcements and we'll send it some emails. But if you follow our page or group, you will receive the notification. So thank you everybody again for attending this webinar or participating in it.
Thank you. Thank you, Patrice.
Thank you all.